Putin's shadow fleet is building and Russian oil is still flowing. And the problem with sanctions is that they usually backfire, and unless you embargo the whole world, it won't really work. Now, for months now, the G7 planners they have been slapping Russia with oil sanctions, but yet oil revenues are still coming in. In fact, Russia has a current account surplus of 227 billion in 2022, and while it's falling in Q3, Q4, it's still higher than in the previous years. So, what is really going on? The G7 price cap of $60 is not low enough, and Russian oil companies still have the financial bandwidth, right, to ship their cargo to Asia. And in fact, we can see Russia's oil output has rebounded even after all the sanctions and price caps. So the oil is definitely still flowing and ships are still transporting it around. And remember that the main aim of the West is to squeeze Russian revenues to the point where Putin doesn't have enough money, he's bankrupt to fight on. But at the same time, they want Russian oil to still enter the markets to prevent a price spike. So you have to choose one. You can't have both, and you quickly see how Russia could easily flip the situation once their shadow fleet is strong enough. And let's quickly recall the oil price cap on Russia, right? Because the economics are important here, the devil is in the details. Now, the G7 coalition slapped a $60 price cap on Russian oil, and that indeed caused the price of euros to drop and hover around $55, $56 around there. And this means Russia can still ship their oil through tankers using Western insurance. Shipping companies can still transport Russian oil without violating any sanctions, right? And in some ports, the price of Euros oils has dropped as low as $40, and this obviously means Russian revenues are dropping, but they aren't completely eliminated. So let's set a baseline here. According to many reports, the cost of production of Russian oil on the low end is around $20 to $30, so anything above that amount is still profitable for Russia. Putin still needs to sell his oil through ships because the pipelines to China aren't enough. But let's understand what really runs the oil markets. It's not sanctions, but incentives and profit. And as long as there's money to be made, Russia will be able to find outlets to sell to and ships to transport the oil. Life will find a way. And according to the reports, Russia is offering deep discounts to China and India, selling their crude at a $15 to $20 discount from the price of Brent crude, which is around $85. And in order to ship the oil, they are paying shipping companies a huge bounty of $15 to $20 per barrel as well. And this means Russia is subsidizing the cost of cheap oil to Asia, and that's why the price of euros is well below $60. Now, shipping companies they are raking in big money thanks to the price cap. We have routers reporting that one shipper made an insane $10 million profit to take 700,000 barrels of oil in an Aframax ship from the Baltics to India, right? So a precedent has been set, guys. There's no breach of sanctions yet because the oil loaded onto the ships is well below the $60 price cap. But what if the price of Brent crude starts to climb to $100 or even $120? Will Russia still subsidize the huge discounts to China and India? Because by then, they might be selling oil at half the price, which is literally insane. Now, conversely, what if the West decides to squeeze Russia further and listens to Zelensky? What if they lower the price cap to $30 or even below? Now, Russia could be making a loss if they sell any oil. And this is where their shadow fleet really comes into play. Russia has been silently building their fleet of dark vessels that do not care about sanctions. All they care about is profit. And to explain the shadow fleet situation, we need to understand how restricted the shipping industry truly is when it comes to Russian oil. Now, American and EU vessels aren't allowed to import Russian crude, which includes Greece that has a ton of ships, right? In fact, Greek tankers carry around 70% of the world's crude oil. So this is more or less a total ban for Western ships. But non-EU ships can still transport Russian oil below the price cap of $60. Now, the big problem for Putin comes when the price cap is dropped to say $30 or the price of Brent crude fries to around maybe $100. If he just relies on conventional ships, he will either make a loss selling his oil or miss out on big profits. And this is where a shadow fleet comes in. Just think of them as professional oil smugglers, right? Now, it's a much simpler term to understand. Now, the shadow or dark vessels do not answer to the Western powers and they hold Russian insurance, which are accepted in many Chinese and Indian ports, right? They don't care about any price cap. They only care about how much money they can make. So just imagine you own a shadow vessel. Russian oil suppliers will pay you $10 million in profit to ship oil to India. and the voyage only takes you 4 to 6 weeks. Now, that is a lot of money for such little time, right? Now, multiply this by hundreds of vessels making non stop trips between Russia, China, and India. Suddenly, guys, you have a $1 billion industry smuggling Russian oil, right? So, Putin gets to transport his oil to India and China no matter how low the price cap is. He will pay the shadow fleet millions in profit to keep Russian oil flowing. So even if the G7 price cap is revised down to $30, Russia can still sell above that cap as long as they pay the oil smugglers their money. And guess what, guys? Business is booming. We have the oil trading giant Trafigura telling us that Russia's shadow fleet of tankers has grown to 600 ships. There are now 400 crude vessels and 200 product ships moving into the dark fleet to transport Russian oil. Just for crude tankers alone, that is around 20% of the world's global fleet, which is allowing Russian crude to flow rather uninterrupted to the rest of the world. So it's just a matter of price now. Now, all these ships are coming, at least the majority of it, from Iran's own Ghost Armada, because Russian suppliers are offering premium rates at least 50% above the market. And we can see that almost 10 million barrels of Russian oil were transported by the Iranian Ghost fleet in January alone, right? That is a lot of oil, and this is only going to continue to grow. Especially with a global economic slowdown, everyone is scrambling for more money. And according to Trafigura, we are building a deep inefficiency into an oil market that has spent decades becoming incredibly efficient, meaning the physical price of oil will diverge more from the paper price thanks to all these sanctions. We all might be paying more for energy in the future. So with his shadow fleet, right, Putin can still sail the seven seas, but Russian oil still needs buyers, and this is one area where the price cap has failed. Now, Russia still has many friends in the world, especially China, India, Africa, from the BRICS nations. They are far from isolated and can still get their oil to many destinations. So back a week ago, we had Ukraine demanding the United States sanction China and India for buying Russian oil. They believe that the sanctions should be applied across the board, no matter how big the country is. But we have the Assistant Secretary of State coming to say that the United States will not sanction India, saying, "We are not looking to sanction India. Our partnership with India is one of our most consequential relationships." And this tells us that America is at least sober enough to understand the fallout of sanctioning a big economic power like India. And this probably extends to China as well, right? So Russian oil is still going to flow to India and China at a discount. And if you combine this with the shadow fleet, that's essentially a floating pipeline from Russia to Asia. They have both the end buyers and the transportation secured. Russian oil is becoming more sanction proof as Putin's shadow fleet grows. And I want us to focus on Sergei Lavrov's visit to the African continent. Russia is trying to find ways and means to ship its oil to other destinations besides China and India, right? After all, how much can they sell there? And according to analysts, African countries are expected to receive at least 6 million barrels of diesel from Russia, approximately one quarter of what the EU used to get from Putin. So the G7 price cap on Russian oil products will be dented as well. It might lower Russian revenues, but it won't cut it off. And as long as Russia still makes a profit on their oil sales, their war funding isn't going to end anytime soon. Russia still has many friends, and they are willing to take in Russian oil and enjoy deep discounts. And here's the $1 trillion question. Are the price caps working? Yes and no, right? It is working in the sense of dampening Russian revenues. It is affecting Putin's profit margin, but it's not able to completely choke off Russian oil flows to the world, especially to Asia, right? And if the G7 decides to lower the price cap to $30, it might backfire further because Russia can just cut production to push global oil prices higher, right? And they have cut production by 5%. And they just use their shadow fleet to still transport their oil at a profit, right? The price cap doesn't just hurt Russia, but also boomerangs back to the West in the terms of higher inflation. And this is going to hit Europe the worst because they are going to suddenly face a big shortfall of diesel after the latest oil products ban on Russian oil. So let's understand this. Not only is the price cap on diesel set at $100 per barrel, the EU has banned themselves from importing Russian diesel. And we can see that in 2022, the majority of Russian diesel went to Europe with over 650,000 barrels sent there in a day. But now this is going to drop to zero in 2023, and Russia has already begun to reroute the majority of their supplies to the rest of the world, especially Asia, Africa, and even Turkey. And once Europe's diesel stocks are drained, they will feel the pain. They have to import expensive diesel from the rest of the world. They will compete with other importers to buy American and Middle Eastern and even Chinese diesel, which will push prices up for them. And this is the problem with sanctions. Money doesn't disappear. It just flows away to other countries, to other counterparties. The price caps are making India and China richer because they can buy cheap Russian oil to either use themselves or to re-export to the rest of the world, right? And we can see an incredible spike of Russian oil flowing to India and China ever since the war started. And until the war ends, we can expect both countries to still get subsidized energy from Putin. And in the West, the oil embargo is forcing the EU to import oil and gas from America and Norway. So those two countries are the biggest winners on the NATO side. But let's realize that Russian revenues are not going to stop, guys, because Putin has two things secure. There's a long line of countries tired of listening to the West, and they'll be ready to buy Russian oil, especially at a discount. And secondly, Putin's shadow fleet is growing, and that is forming a smuggler's route, right? He essentially has a virtual floating pipeline from Russia to China and India. But the sanctions are also going to force Russia to build up their own fleet. They have their own state-run Sovietcom fleet, which is totally covered by Russian insurance. And if this fleet grows and they build more vessels in the future, the oil sanctions that revolve around marine insurance and shipping will be less and less effective, right? And just recently, Putin also cut oil production by 500,000 barrels a day, which could increase the oil price above the price cap of $60. And this means he is confident that the shadow fleet can help circumvent the sanctions and transport his oil in sufficient quantities. And I don't think Russian revenues are going to collapse anytime soon. Oil will still flow around, and the price that we have to pay is higher energy inflation. So strap yourselves in and realize Russia's war funding is far from over. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Are the oil sanctions finally over? Will Russia's shadow fleet keep them afloat? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these insane times.